Hello, everybody. I am Sarthak Kaul, and this is True Calling. Our guest today is Zaky J. He specializes in meditation, breathwork, and high performance creativity. Zaky has over 10 years of meditation experience and started by traveling around the world studying in ashrams, meditation centers, and temples. On his YouTube channel, he live streamed 24 hours of meditation straight with no sleep or eating breaks. He has a diverse and eclectic background that has ranged from startups to the dance world and martial arts. He has earned grants and awards for dance and choreography, even having done performance art in New York City. Currently, he consults brands in Austin that align with his mission to make the world 1% happier. Here we go, Zaky. How are we?
Dude, I'm great. Thank you for having me, man. I really appreciate being here.
Dude, it was an instant connection when we were at that event a few days ago, the VC event, and yeah, the things we talked about, I was like, this is someone that I would love to know more about, and then you sent me this intro, and I'm like, dancing, martial arts, it's like, where did that come from? I thought you were only consulting these brands, and
Yeah.
I just love the overall mission that you have. So something I want to start off with is, you've sort of delved into a lot of different topics, and you're kind of like a generalist in understanding so many different things. But if someone from the outside is looking at you, what is the story that they need to know about Zaky to understand why you do what you do?
Yeah, man, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that one. Yeah, what I'm trying to do on a regular is to have as many adventures as possible. I'm trying to hit the side quests. I'm trying to hit the main quest. And in order to truly go into your character development arc is what I believe, you're going to have to get your hands dirty in multiple different disciplines. Because if you just figure out your one thing that works for you for one period of time, you might realize that the version of you 10 years later could use a lot more support. And so for me, I think for a while, like growing up, I was afraid to lean into the generalist identity. And because most of society is really asking you and demanding of you to be a specialist, even if they desperately need generalists everywhere.
Why do you say that? They desperately need generalists.
Yeah, it's if people had to have a diversity of ideas, but they don't either know or they're not willing to fully dive into what that would mean, right? A generalist is somebody that is capable of a lot of different techniques. It's capable of being knowledgeable in a lot of different disciplines. And that is a massive asset, especially if you're doing operations. If you're ever doing operations in business, you want to know how to operate in many different environments. And that's going to be such a boon for you. So for me, I do it out of fun. And you later realize, okay, if you're having a lot of fun in these environments, like learning all these different things, later you can roll it up into business or almost any other vertical that you're joining. So I find that the world is so used to promoting specialists that it's so weak in all these other areas that it just doesn't know how to move out of that death spiral. And that's why you have books like Dave Epstein, who talks about range. And when I read that book, I was like, finally, somebody's speaking this language. I can identify with a bigger purpose because then what most people would say if you're going through college is you're not focused. You're everywhere all at once. Why can't you just pick one thing to study, right? It's just
I'm so glad you brought that book up. I think he's like an unofficial book sponsor for my podcast. Every single podcast I've had, that book has been touched by Dave Epstein. Which tells me a lot about myself, I guess. What have you learned from that book? The Range is the book you're talking about. What have you learned from that book? And why, in the world we're in right now, especially, is generalization going to benefit someone, let's say, coming out of college?
Yeah, this is great because we're going up into the strange times where automation is gonna hit. And when automation hits and then people are able to code from their phones, we at the event that we met, this one gentleman said basically they're going to have your first few unicorns that are solo entrepreneurs. A $1 billion solo entrepreneur. straight out the box, being able to hit their codes, being able to push out technology. And if you are going down a specialist train of thought, you're not going to have the skills to be that unicorn, which will be the future. Like those people, if you can just build technology, that's a great boost for you. But to also be a CEO capable of raising money and having those investor relationships, you're going to need to be savvy. You can't just be an engineer behind the scene. You have to be your front of house and your back of house now. And that's where range is coming into play.
Like the last conversation that I released was with this super young dude. He's like 21 years old. He was at UT Austin. He dropped out of UT Austin, moved to the Bay, and started this company called Fine Tune that specifically helps other builders build in like a multi-agent environment. So basically, like helps others build the infrastructure underneath it that can help you scale your agentic system. Basically, what you're talking about is like this one guy. There's going to be one person, but like there's going to be what we have like right now is like these virtual assistants and executive assistants. It's just like all of that is just a bunch of models that are running at the back and helping you scale your company. Is that something you see? You're much more on the health and wellness side. You're super tapped into that stuff. I mean, breathwork is one part, but then we've talked about like your workouts. We've talked about like what you eat and stuff. Like, how do you see the health and wellness system change as a result of AI? Is there anything you see that's kind of connecting there?
Yeah. If you see some of the new wearable technologies that are coming out, I'm super bullish on wearable technologies. Maybe not where they stand at the moment, but I see the future in health and wellness where you have your brain scans on your phone, where in real time you can see how your brain is mapping out onto your environment. So if you're getting this neural activations from your environment, you can just dive down that rabbit hole so much faster. And if you're wondering why you're in an environment and you're not getting that brain activation, you can like lean into building out that skill set for yourself. So for me, that's like one of the that the near future, we're not like wearables are leaning towards that. And once we can have where we can just check your Fitbit, check your Apple Watch, and instead of just, for me, when I'm wearing a wearable, I often check my heart rate.
Why is that?
It's when you're checking your heart rate in different situations, you can see if you're kind of aligned with the moment.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah. If you're dropped into a nice resting heart rate and you're in a stressful environment, like pat yourself on the back. You are winning.
Wow.
And you can like easily tell these things, right? You just say like, okay, I'm like at a 70. Some people their resting heart rate might be like a 40 if they're like a marathon runner, and they're just cool and collected. And you can read that at almost any given point in time if you were wearing a heart rate monitor, and they're like accurate, like plus or minus, like a given range. And for me, that's been really interesting in dropping into my breath work and dropping into the moment. I can just I'm all of a sudden I'm bouncing a little bit higher for any reason, right? And then I can just be like, okay, let me ground myself. Let me take a few deep breaths. And then my heart rate normalizes. And then your cognitive ability is also going to be de-risked. You're going to take out the friction from all these internal structures that are happening unconsciously that might cause you anxiety. But if you can just look at them and you're like, wait, I shouldn't be having anxious now. What could I do about that?
Breathe.
And you take a sacred pause. And now you're winning again.
Have you read the book Anxious Generation?
I've not read that one. Is that good?
Okay, so there's a NYU professor, Jonathan Haidt. He kind of just generally talks about how so many of the younger generation is anxious. What do you think the anxiety stems from? Like, what do you think anxiety as an emotion stems from?
There's so much of anxiety in is my opinion is also based off of environment, which is like kind of crazy. Like if you want to go as deep as Jungian too, like he was seeing visions of like World War I when he was a kid, like in his dreams. Like that's like a wild concept of how connected we are with our environment. And people like to have the pretension that ego is a bastion, and it does create those walls, and you can center yourself within your walls. But the effect that the environment has, especially if you have a more sensitive like attunement to the world, is huge. And so right now we're probably in this like catalytic environment where it's like there's stressors all over the place, not to mention all the like these biological stressors from like foods and like our water supply. Like that's a huge problem right there. That is a daily friction point for most people, even if they don't know about it, right? And then on top of that, you have the stress of we see the world around us. And if you're a smart person, if you like adhere to Paul Graham, if you just listen to how he talks about smart people as they move through environments, they notice things, right? So you're having enough smart people notice things, and they're just like, why isn't this better? Why isn't this the future that we were promised? Like, and when they figure out how to fix that future, it's like very basic fixes, and they're not seeing anyone capable of doing that. Like,
what are these fixes?
Well, I truly believe that if you get the health of the individuals on point, you're gonna take so much anxiety out of play. And most people are making their decisions based off of this fear, and they're making these decisions off anxiety. Because right now there's energy moving through your system, and whatever is also in your system is creating a lens that energy has to go through. So if you are anxious about, like, could be rent, it could be like the job market, because you're in the corporate world, and all of a sudden, like my friends, when I talk to them about the corporate world, they're like, it's getting more cutthroat because as the economy is like, shrinking or hitting whatever its recession, people in the corporate world, it becomes Machiavellian, the Hunger Games, but corporate side, right? And so that causes so much pain points that most people are trying to navigate, and they're also probably unintentionally unaware of it. But if you invest into your health bar, or you can say your quality of life or health span, then you can be at the center of the storm, and you still know you're in the storm because you see the effects of it around you, but you can buy yourself some time. And that time that you buy yourself is the time to actually think clearly. It's the time to like process the information instead of being just purely reactive. So people have to help their health bar so they can drop out of that reactivity and start taking that a little bit of this responsibility, unfortunately, for sometimes like problems that are outside, like they didn't even create them.
There's so many ways we can take this conversation. So I want to jump to when we talked a few days ago on call, and you sort of mentioned this in passing. You were like, you've been doing meditation, breathwork for a while now, and so many of not just the younger people, everyone is kind of like, they try their way in like meditation, they try their way through a breathwork, sort of something that they see, a Calm app or something, and they're like, no, this is not for me. And you sort of mentioned, like, you specifically like went into or are writing something around like the kinds of breathwork or meditation you can do based on your personality type.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, this is a big friction point when people are getting into meditation. Is there is a lot of esoteric knowledge surrounding this field. And it's because a lot of this development, building out your consciousness, has been gatekept. Like the Dalai Lama, for instance, finally allowed the Tibetan lamas to share their yogas, to share their sutras and share their wisdom. And in order for that to happen, it took China to invade Tibet. You know what I mean? And for a diaspora of the theological power structure, the Dalai Lama and all the lamas left that country. And in order to function, they're like, okay, we have to open the doors now. So I can completely understand why people are not able to stick with meditations when they don't actually, they're just moving around in a dark room, and they hope they're landing on something that's useful. And these apps come out, and these apps, like, they generally teach mindfulness, and they do teach meditation too, but they're not giving you this deep seed of wisdom that most people, they heard you can get from meditation. They're like, how do I get that? I heard you could get enlightenment. How come, like, I do this app, I'm not enlightened, right?
Yeah, why is the room still dark? I'm not enlightened. Yeah.
And so before they can become self-luminous, they're still like heavily reliant on whatever inputs they can gather on this subject. And America especially is not a place where I'll give you an example. Naval talks about Naval Ravikant talks about if you want to get into spirituality, you know what you first have to do? Guess.
Know yourself.
Well, I mean, yeah, you should know yourself, but he says get rich first.
Oh.
It's totally reasonable, right? It's totally reasonable. Get rich first, right? But
So you have the time to
yeah,
go
so
into
you have
that.
time. For me, that's a symptom of a culture that doesn't understand itself. If you have to get rich to study God, right? In order to study yourself, and that is probably one of the most important historical markers that anytime anyone has ever studied themselves to the point where they couldn't say, "Hey, I know," right? I know, and I know how to navigate meditation. I know how to navigate breathworks. I know how to navigate like yoga, all that stuff. Like historically speaking, those people reach out over time and through time and still speak volumes to people. And in America, we don't really have that culture. And that's like a huge topic too. It's, we're barely investing in it. And this is a type of technology that everywhere it has popped up, it has either made the world it's refined the world. If you look at Buddhism, it has given people the ability to study consciousness at a really deep level. If you look at Christianity, it has actively like fought against like tyranny in the world. It's like slavery. Like Christian nations have been moving away from slavery and they're still fighting against slavery today. So that all happened from like the theological side of these skill sets. And we haven't recognized this as in the modern Western culture, we haven't recognized this as a worthy skill. So there's almost no infrastructure for it within America. If you want to study anything to do with meditation, your best bet, apart from like an ashram that you could visit, is if you're going to seminary. But just to get into seminary, you have to go through a 4-year college.
Okay.
Just to study anything, even if you're just like, hey, look, I'm interested in studying God, right? You're going to have to go do like a doctorate program. And then after you get out of that doctorate program of 8 years of schooling, you're not even getting paid that well. So you're going to be a starving artist and it's not set up. And then America's not walkable too, which is a huge problem because everywhere you see these people standing out in history and time, they were in walkable areas of the world. And they could talk to people, they could integrate. If you look at Jesus, he was talking to the Gentiles, like the Romans. He was talking to the Jewish people. He was, people even speculate that he even went down as far as India. But in America, if you're trying to walk from East Coast to West Coast, you're gonna get pulled over on the highway just for walking, just for walking in a place where you pay taxes. And that's this completely not, okay. So if you want to go from point A to point B in America, you have to be rich. You have to at least own a car. But you want to study spirituality. You want to understand the real nature of the world. You want to understand what isn't truly important about why you're alive. And you can't even study that. You have to almost be specialized to the point where if you're Naval Ravikant, you don't worry, just exit a few companies. That's easy. And then you can get that's your best bet to get closest to God in America.
So going back to this thing around like making it somewhat easier for people to tap into something like meditation, which is when you say the different personality types and like meditation for different personality types, like what do you see there? Like what can you share about that?
So yeah, I should have answered that part. Yeah. So the different personality types, when people are going into meditation too, apart from all these environmental problems that I've just described, which is like huge barriers of entry, everyone's personality types, when they pick up an app, that app might not be suited for them. Because that app is going to tell you, hey, just sit down, calm down, just find your, center and just maybe do some breathing. And that person the app is informing, that person's ADHD, right? They're like, oh, you know what the worst thing is? Just to sit still. And then you're asking them to sit still, right? And so they're like, well, meditation will never be for me then. Because people that are super smart too, they can't stop thinking. And if you ever talk to like these high level people, they're like, I'm thinking all the time. I'm having ideas 24/7.
Yeah.
And then you're asking them, hey, the only way you should learn meditation is to sit still. And while that that there is some truth to that. There is way more accessible points of entry. And for somebody that has ADHD, that's hyperactive, that has like a ton of thoughts, that is like actually intelligent, it's probably better for you to drop into something that's more martial based, more physical. And you can do walking meditation, you can do martial arts, you can do qigong, you can do tai chi. Like those things are very much suited for people that have to be physically active. So when you look at the yogas, there are many different yogas out there. There's the Raja Yoga, Maha Yoga, and when people are seeing all these different yogas, there's the Bhakti Yoga, right? And they're like, why are there so many yogas? Isn't there not just one yoga? And it's the Lululemon Yoga. Why? But it's like there's different yogas for a reason, and it's because back in the day when Patanjali was developing out the ideas for his sutras, he was trying to address as many different problem points of entering into yoga or meditation or breathwork as possible. So,
dude, he's an entrepreneur. Like people don't realize that. Like it's like he's like looking at the exact problems that the customers were having while he was trying to move into this space, and he's like, all right, I have this solution for you, this solution for you. That's exactly right.
yes.
I think that's a point in Hinduism as well in general. It's like every time I get asked like, are you Hindu or is your family Hindu? And they are. And it's like, why is there like not one God? And it's the same kind of thing in my opinion, and the way that I've seen Hinduism. It's like every god that's there is sort of on the underlying reason behind that is to focus on a particular path that you want to take, and it's to give you the access to diverse paths based on who you are as a person, and to choose the whatever deity you're following as a result of like focusing on that thing. And I think that's the beauty in Hinduism as a religion. It's very different that way because they've tried to do this exact thing that Patanjali did, is like, we'll give you as many different ways to access the same thing that you're trying to access, which is God. And we'll try to break down the paths in the ways that you think is most comfortable. So it's, to your point, it is like giving people access to more of those things. So like for you're saying for people that are like mostly ADHD, which is a lot of people now, even if they're like not diagnosed, it's just like the attention span is not there. You're saying more physical movements are beneficial.
Yeah, that's like super easy for them. And you're spot on. This is like another little bit of a tangent when you're bringing up the gods, the different gods, and the people worshiping. So this is a part of the bhakti structure of worship, right? And just like the martial movements and physical movements is great for people, especially children too. Like ask them to sit down, I dare you. But the bhakti tradition is, and using belief structure is like, okay, you might not have the like jhana yoga, like the capabilities of reading sutras all day and diving into these dense texts and doing a monastic type of study. But through worship, you can identify a belief structure that can get you to the knowledge that you actually seek to be a wise person. And so for a while, especially in Tibetan and Hinduism, people have these god worships. And when they worship that god, what ends up happening is they're updating their mythological structure, and they're updating it with the best parts of what they are worshiping. They end up resembling and modeling themselves after these gods because they're attributes. And that is really important because with just belief structure, you can still advance yourself. And so that, like, if you don't have a lot of access to information, or you just are a deeply felt person, which is for guys, it's hard to be felt because that's a type of skill that it's not really taught well. And it's probably not even recognized as a skill, is to feel your way through the world. But feeling your way through the world is like advanced technology. If you listen to John Boyd, he basically wrote the doctrine on how to do air-to-air combat. He built jet planes for the military. He worked in the Pentagon, all this other stuff. Crazy guy. Sorry, where's I going with that one?
Feeling.
Yes, feeling. Yes, thank you. So he talks about Fingergespitzen. It's a tip of the finger feel. And being able to drop into your intuitive feeling space in order to operate in any environment is critically important to de-risking your environment and to taking as much friction out of the environment when you're operating within it. And you can use your intuition and you can use your feeling to advance yourself in life. And it's just like, okay, for a belief structure, we have known that for a while. And that's why you have so many belief structures out there that you can identify with, and so many different gods, especially in Hinduism and in Tibetan Buddhism, that have good attributes. So you have like the god that can heal people. You have the god that's like it's a strong warrior, right? And if you wanted to like learn how to heal people, you studied like the green Buddha, for instance. And then out of that, if you were a healer, a doctor, you could become a better version of that. If you're a warrior, you studied like a god with that archetype, and then you're updating your mythological structure. And people don't realize that the mythological structure can be updated, and that's what Carl Jung was talking about for a lot. That's what Joseph Campbell talks about all the time too. And that's a different language too, and it's a different language that we keep preserving as humans for the reason that it's critically important in passing on information that transcends like cultural language. Like, sorry. Go
No. On that point, so, everyone goes to college almost, or a lot of people go to college. Almost everyone tries to go to some version of schooling. Have you seen any schools or colleges out there in the US that are focused on bringing in ancient wisdom?
Every now and then, if you're lucky, you'll have an adjunct professor that shows up and then like they pop off. I think John Kabat-Zinn, I think he works out of Massachusetts College. He works somewhere like somewhere on the East Coast, and he had classes because he built out a mindfulness institute. But most people don't have a mindfulness institute on their campus. So for the most part, it's not being addressed as a problem as a whole. It's not really recognized. It's like it's something that a class you can sign up for, but it's not the main major, And so if you have an adjunct that comes through and maybe talks about Eastern philosophy, like for most people, like, oh, okay, that's the closest they can get to like meditation in one of these formal environments. But for everyone else, I'm like, if you want to learn this stuff, like probably college is probably not the place unless you're doing a PhD and you're developing your own program.
So, the reason I asked that is because there's definitely value. That's the thing. There's value in it. Value in learning the principles that are going to help you in life in general. Something like how to handle or just flow through chaos, which is like going to be a topic that's going to exist for the next few decades in our life. And it's always existed, but like we're especially in that zone right now where like things are constantly changing, especially in the US. Like you can just take US as an example, but geopolitically there's so many things happening, right? So how do you package something like meditation to make it more accessible to the masses? That's something that I've been thinking about as well, because it's not that it's the content and the path to do it is there, but the entry point and how to get there is sort of lacking for a lot of the people, and they don't see how this connects to the problems that they're having in their life. And therapy is an easy way to go. Like therapy has become this big thing now, which was like if I would have told my parents like 5 years ago I'm going to a therapist, they would have told me you should stay there then. So like it's just like one of those things that like it's become mainstream. How does this become mainstream? Meditation.
Yeah, I think if you're able to speak about it in a very secular way, which is something that I've actively been trying to do, it's going to become way more accessible. Because if you're speaking about it in like maybe like a hippy dippy type of way, then it's a love or hate thing. And the people that are in of business mind, they're just like, why would I need to even touch that? But for me, the way I try to speak about meditation is you deeply understand your mind. You might not understand the full mind-body connection just by meditating, but you're going to deeply understand your mind. And what I mean by this understanding is if you are behind the wheel or in the cockpit of an airplane, you're going to have all these dials in front of you. You're going to have all this information input. And with meditation, you're actually going to be able to read that information input. And then you can make decisions based off of the what is on your screen, what is on your dashboard. And if you don't study meditation, you maybe naturally you'll come across, you'll know how to operate generally, but you're gonna miss out on some of the unique dials that you could have developed for yourself, like biomarkers, for instance. You can like feel energy, you can feel thoughts, you can feel how if you are being reactive in a moment. And once you can feel that, you can decide, hey, do I still want to continue down where this readout is telling me that I'm going in this direction? Do I still want to continue with that direction? And yeah, so that's how you can make it really secular.
So you said something on, I saw this on your LinkedIn, and I don't know when you last updated it, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. You said like after college, I had a lot of knowledge that I didn't know what to do with. So I took a year off to meditate.
Yeah.
After coming back down from the mountain, I knew I wanted to help businesses grow. So I read hundreds of books, surrounded myself with brilliant people to learn from, and started helping founders find focus. Why, first of all, give us some context on when you came out of college, you had a lot of knowledge but didn't know what to do with. This is what you're talking about here, like being able to figure out the decisions to make with the inputs you already have. What did meditation do for you in that moment?
Yeah, for me, especially out of going out of college, kind of had this existential problem because I was just like, I still don't have that 6-figure job. I don't even know how I'll get there at this point other than just grinding, and just picking a job and working my way up a hierarchy, for instance. But what I did know is I had a lot of stress in my body, and going through that process, which was supposed to be a liberating process where at the end of the tunnel, you get rewarded. I was just like, well, the rewards might not be fully there. At least they're not like gifted to you. You're still going to have to it felt like the real work was going to begin. Right. And before I wanted to start the real work of becoming like any bit successful in business, I still had a bunch of deep questions that I needed to get answered. And I believed that if I could answer those questions, I could be a better service to the world. But
can you share for other people a question or two that you were thinking about that time?
Yeah, so everyone's going to have like, what is the meaning of life as a general point, and then what is the meaning of their life? It's like, what is the meaning of generally, like what's going on over here in the world, and then what am I supposed to do?
How do I fit in this meaning?
Yeah.
What is my meaning in this?
And if you are constantly having to jump through hoops, you probably don't have time to really think about that in a deep set way. And if you go from college, you're expected to drop straight into the workforce. And it's like, where's your time to think? Where's your time to like do any bit of deep research? You people can say this is soul searching, but like doing deep research into yourself, you don't have that. So for me, I was just like being super scrappy. I had my car that that I had for a while, and I just hopped in there. I bought plane tickets. I basically went broke just spending all my money learning this stuff. You know what I mean? And that's probably why it wasn't a longer journey than a year, because I was like, I can afford to, on $400 a month, basically, afford to do this journey for 1 year. And then after that, I was like, okay, I got to make money. I could have stayed at some of these ashrams indefinitely.
Where were you at?
I went into Nepal. I went to temples and ashrams there, and then up and down the East Coast in Vipassana. I would stop by if there's any monks around. I would try to talk to them. I went to many different temples just to get like a foundational basis as much as I could to see if anyone at these places was like rich with knowledge and wisdom. And you bump into them every now and then.
So tell us an interaction there. Like, what is something you remember, a story that you remember, maybe a question you asked them and something you received as a result of that?
Yeah. So the biggest thing that taught me that meditation was real, and it was something that was deeper than just mindfulness, and is I had this mystical moment. And this mystical moment happened. I went to this Hare Krishna temple because I was like, okay, what's going on here? And I was sitting there doing the worship. They're singing, they're dancing, and they're having a good time. I'm like, okay, this is a party. I get it.
It's a rave.
Yeah. And then towards the end, they give out food, right? And I just waited in the back of the line. Everyone got their food. I show up. There's a couple of people behind me. And as I get my plate of food, they had run out of food because there's a lot of people that showed up that day. And I was just like, I felt really bad because I was like, these guys are true believers. The people that were behind me, like, I'm just a tourist. I don't like really deserve to be eating this bounty right now. So I'm gonna give my food to them because they want to be here. They're going to be here. So that's what I did. And there's a traveling monk there, and he saw this, and he came over to me. He's like, "Hey, did you eat today?" And I was just like, "No, I didn't eat." And I kind of just expressed like, I felt like they should have it more than I did. And he's like, "Okay, well, after this, after you like enjoy tea and stuff like that, come over to my lodgings, which is like right next door, and then we'll have like organic pizzas that he's made." So I went over, I ate some organic pizzas with this monk. And then he's just like, "Have you ever done meditation?" I was just like, I've been studying it. I think I'm doing meditation, whatever, but I can't really say I've done meditation at that time. He's just, "Okay, well, why don't we just do some meditation?" I was like, "Great. Sounds good." So we drop into meditation. And as soon as we drop into meditation, if you ever meditate with a real meditator, they have a felt presence and your mirror neurons are going to start to activate. And then you're going to understand meditation is a lot simpler because you're modeling yourself off of the communication that comes out of your body language. So I'm modeling myself. I'm like, okay, am I doing this right? Okay. I drop in and I have this, it felt like a hole like opened up in my forehead, like a hole like that was big enough that I could stick my finger directly into my brain. And I'm sitting there like in the middle of meditation. I'm just like, I'm just like slowly, like I'm afraid, am I going to poke myself in the soft spot of my head or something, right? And I'm just like doing that, but I'm just touching my forehead, but I still feel this distinct like hole in my forehead. And I'm just like, I guess that's just it now. Like that's just what I'll have to deal with for the rest of this meditation. And it was kind of a little bit scary. And I just continued to drop into meditation. And then what I thought was just like a few minutes, it was a blink of time. It was like 25 minutes later. And he's just like, "Okay, meditation's over." And I was just like, oh, it was the first time I felt anything to do with mystical information. It was the first time I ever bumped into it. And I was like, there's more to meditation than just a calm demeanor and a peaceful like mind.
Yeah,
There's
Yoda just
something
sitting
there.
in one place.
Yeah.
What was that hole indicating for you?
It was, when I think about it as a mystical moment, like sometimes mystical moments take a long time to unpack because they're just really dense with information. And it just like it might take you like a couple of years to truly understand whatever that lesson was. But for me, the lesson was like, I was like kind of opening up my ability to think. It was giving me space, like the spaciousness of mind that you can have. Like, because for so long I had been so constrained with my thinking, I was going down these very defined pathways. And this was like the first time I felt like I had space enough to just sit and relax, or just to sit and be able to potentially think, or to sit and potentially not be able to think, which is a crazy thought. I can sit and not
That is also a thought.
Yeah. So it was a relief just to feel that the weight that was lifted off of the burden of your mind. And I feel like people, especially when they're first getting started off, they might not get that lucky where they hit a mystical experience. And the only reason I got that mystical experience was because I was with a monk that has been meditating for a long time. And he was just traveling, teaching people.
Dude, this just like opened up a whole host of things here. So much of our world rewards thinking and rewards high quality thinking, and there's a place for that. But someone just like not thinking about things and just like being present and sort of reflecting off the energy they receive from people, you sort of looked at like this, why is this guy not thinking? Why is this person actually not spending the time to critically go through the information and instead just focusing on not thinking? What is the value of not thinking?
Yeah. I think a lot of people, because society has put so much weight on the rational mind, that people think that that's the self-generating, that's where they're getting all their ideas from. If I just sharpen my mind, I'll have more of these ideas. But all these ideas are being filtered through your concepts. They're being filtered through your philosophy and your belief structure. Thinking itself is just either a high quality or a low quality filter. And where you're actually getting your boost is your intuitive mind. And that intuitive mind is deep. It's far deeper than you have access to with your immediate reach with thoughts. And if you only use your rational mind, you can only go so far. But if you're willing to go out onto that edge and be like, you know what, I might want to spend time not thinking. I want to spend time in the chaos of the unknown. What usually happens is, well, first off, you're resting your mind too. And if you have a super tense muscle all the time, like try throwing a punch while you're flexing your whole body. It's really hard to throw a punch. But when you're actually relaxed, and then you can finally actually have an explosive movement, right? Because you're in the center, you have 360 degrees of movement possibilities. And that's the same thing with your mental, with your mind and being able to think, is you'll have 360 degrees of thought available to you if you can actually sit and rest into spaciousness. That right there means that you're not just being constantly led by either environmental markers. You're not constantly being led by it could be propaganda. You could be, or just the outsized influence that people have on each other.
We talk a lot about discernment and like how important that as a skill is. One of the guys we had on, he's a professor at UT Austin, and he the thing I loved about his teaching, because I was part of one of the classes there, was how whatever information that he took when it came to the companies that he's talking about, it was all with a grain of salt. Like everything had a level of skepticism built in, because he was trying to think by himself about those things, rather than just outsource your brain to a media outlet and just take that in. But I never thought of discernment from this standpoint, which is like when you give yourself the space to take a step back and just take all that's there, and then decide and have a better way of making decisions on the things that actually make sense there. You're discerning. That's exactly what you're doing. Yeah. And you're discerning for what's best for you in that moment. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, and the thing is, like, you get better at using your intuitive mind too. Like, just like you can get better at like speaking more eloquently, you're gonna get better at using your intuitive mind. And then if you have all these really high quality filters on top of that, now you're in like a really great winning position, because that your wellspring of deep wisdom that's inside your body, that's inside your soul, has constant access to the outer world. It has to go through less bureaucracy in order to reveal itself into the greater outer world. And you want to take as much of the obstacles out of the way as possible, so your intuitive mind you can use your actual processing power to do real work, because your rational mind, it runs off of like a lot of times willpower that most people want it to do. They want to be like, I've done all this work with my mind, I've honed it over this years, and I'm going to use willpower and I'm going to tackle problems. And then you find out that a ton of people that are making critical advancements, especially in science, they're quoting their intuitive mind. And Einstein talks about this.
I was going to say, Einstein talks about, like, even with his walks, that's sort of what he would do every day, is like walk for an hour or something. And he was tapping into that, what you said, like walking meditation, just like his own version of that, where he would just go around and let his mind completely wander. Mind's out of the way at that point. It's just what's being downloaded, what information is being downloaded post your mind, when your mind has stopped thinking about things. And I mean, that's kind of why, like, when we sleep or take a nap, sometimes we have some of the best. I'm sure we've all had those experiences. Like very recently, I was sort of, I told myself that I will write something thoughtful every day on LinkedIn, and I just kept it to the weekdays. And then I remember one day where, like, there was this resistance, like from, like, I couldn't tell where it's coming from. It's just a very weird thing where you wake up and like, okay, something's just pulling me away from getting on my laptop and writing. And I was trying to explore it just like by sitting there. I was literally laying in bed. I was like, where is this coming from? Because there's nothing stopping me. There's no one saying anything. No, I'm not saying anything to myself directly, but then I like paused for a second, and then I noticed, like, I just went like, that's just a thought. I let the thought kind of just go. And as soon as the thought was gone, I was able to just write. And it was a very weird thing. Because I don't necessarily meditate. I go on these walks, and I'm the same. Like, sitting still has been very hard for me. So these walks have helped a lot. But in that moment, I realized like you have this the beliefs that we hold on to so like dearly and so closely to us. There is a part of letting go of those beliefs. And right after you let go, everything flows in. And you're able to use whatever you want to as a result of that.
Yeah.
When you give yourself that space to just be. A lot of our stuff is around doing, right? Like we like even every networking event you go to is like, what do you do? I was talking to actually someone about this, like why does everyone ask this question of like, what do you do? And I kind of try to pattern disrupt in these situations, and I ask people like, who do you want to be?
Oh.
And it's just changed the way they like the conversation goes. It just changes the way that people think about themselves, and they kind of show up as a realer version of themselves, because what do you do has become this like filter, right? Again, talking about filters, it's a low or high quality filter on top of your thinking. That it's almost like it's like code that's already built in, and you're just like snap. As soon as you hear the question, it's like if else statement.
Yeah.
If you hear what do you do, you say this, and like I think this is very powerful. This is part of it. I wanna talk to you a little bit about high performance creativity, because you use those words.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you? What is high performance creativity?
So high performance creativity, especially with the story you just mentioned, where you've just bumped into a little bit of what could be colloquially referred to as writer's block, right? You're bumping into this sense where something that you know you can do, and you have been doing, all of a sudden now you feel like stifled by it. If you want to have this high performance creativity, like it's this deep trust that you have that you're an infinite wellspring of knowledge, that you actually have something that's, anytime you're trying to say something, you can rely on your intuition to provide you with important things that will also help you learn more about the world and yourself in the moment. And you have to develop out your intuition in order to get this high performance creativity. And then after you developed your feeling of your intuition, trust enough into it to actually practice where your intuition wants you to go, whether it's in art or whether it's in business. And because a lot of great businesses were built off of trusting an idea of building out the future that did not currently exist. And
Jobs comes to mind.
Jobs comes to mind, exactly. And for me, especially when I brought up Einstein, like he talked about the sacred mind as being the intuitive mind as being a sacred gift, and the rational mind as being a servant. Like most people have come across similar statements, like, you know, that the heart is a good master, and that the mind is just a servant, you know, but people get it twisted, and they make the mind the master and the heart the servant to the mind. And then you can only have that relationship for so long. But the reason why I brought that up is, by his own estimations, Einstein says that he was an average person, just a completely average person. And if you look at his pedigree, you look at his history, he was just an average person. But all of a sudden, he's tapping into his intuition. And then he goes from this, like, you know, patent clerk to the top of the world. Like, you point to other patent clerks that are just rising to the top of the world, right? That are playing violin on stage, that are crushing advanced sciences and mathematics. Like, if that was always the case, then you would see more people out of these bureaucracies just showing up in other disciplines. But for some reason, that's not the case. And what actually happened with Einstein is he figured out how to get into deep touch with his intuitive mind. And then that kept improving his ability to think and to express himself, to the point where now he was a high-performing individual, and he had high-performance creativity, and he was constantly on display of it, and you couldn't stop it.
Man, so I'll have two questions. I know we have a little bit time left here. Time's always an interesting thing. Okay, so one thing on that, right? Like, what, according to you, propels people that are in a position like a patent clerk to then go into that sort of zone? You know, like, and even for scientists, for example, so much of science people like generally think about is this logical, rational mind that's kind of thinking through problems intellectually and trying to come up with solutions to, like, people that research deep into like physics and all this stuff. But then you're saying like, hey, Einstein uses the intuitive mind. So how do you explain to someone that that intuition is helping you make these discoveries that seem very rational, or like seem very scientifically oriented, which doesn't feel like it's connected to intuition?
Yeah. Well, you have to have a little bit of experimentation. You actually have to do trial and error to the point where then you start to see some results from it. And that you have to start to feel those results coming like into real time too. So for Einstein, for instance, he was deeply developing out his ability to do thought experiments.
The Gedanken experiments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in order to actually run thought experiments, you have to have a high visual capacity, like to actually visualize things in movement and to with fidelity model them in your mind. And that's a lot of processing power. That's like if, and most people don't even have, not most people, there's a lot of people that don't have either an internal monologue or the ability to do like shape rotation. You know what I mean?
What does that mean?
To take a shape and like rotate it in their mind. Right. So you see these a lot of times on IQ tests. Like there's people who can't shape rotate. So there's like a meme like you can't shape rotate. You know what I mean?
I sucked at that part of the test, like where they had to just move shapes. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that the easier that becomes, the easier it is for your mind to process and project the world as a model. And artists are really good at this, right? Artists, they can, in their mind, they can see something and then they can faithfully recreate it as well. So that level of your imagination, you can build out and you can become more skilled at it. And then when you become more skilled at it, if you also want to apply it to a discipline, it doesn't matter if it's science or art or if it's just writing. You know, if you're writing and you're just like, I actually want to see, like Lewis Carroll. He's like, what is Alice in Wonderland going to be up to? Let me think about this. And he can see in his mind's eye what's going on with this, right? Tolkien, he's like, I wonder what's going on in Middle Earth. You know what I mean? He can see that. So in any discipline you can imagine, if you have the ability to faithfully recreate with your imagination, either a representative of reality or an altered reality, a better reality, then you can improve upon that with intuition, but you have to trust that process, and it's not going to be gifted to you instantly. Artists are not, making high definition pictures right off the bat, right? They have to start somewhere, and they're starting with their vague shapes and forms, and that's usually what's going to happen when you start figuring out how to build out your imagination. Is it's for me, I didn't have like an internal monologue for a while, and I'm still learning how to shape rotate.
Yeah. Speaking of shape rotation, like it just made me think of this. Like I was yesterday talking to I was in a dinner. It was like 8 people. We were all fellows for this one program that was in UT Austin, and it was started by the endowment and funding for that was given by this couple, and their names John and Rebecca Brumley. John's taken 6 oil and gas companies public. This man's 82 years old. He was there. He was sitting, and before we started the dinner, I was talking to him, and I asked him like. He kind of was talking about how little he thinks about money. And that was very interesting to me because of how much money he has made and how much money he's actually deployed in at UT Austin, especially with so many fellowships. And he said there's something very interesting. He said, like even when I didn't have money, I almost knew that I was going to make money. And there was nothing around him. There was no reality around him that was showing him that he had money. He had $300 before, like at that time when he was thinking of doing these things. But that belief, like that almost intuition that you're saying that came from at that time was something very interesting to me, because I think a lot of people struggle with that, like seeing the reality that they want to exist in and creating that reality. And I think writing is a very good example of that. Like the best writers I have seen are able to, through what they write, show exactly what you want to see. And it's this ability to like use words in such a clear way that you can imagine the words, right? And I think that's fascinating. What you're saying is like shape rotation. Like, how have you practiced that? Like, how can someone practice visualization better?
Yeah, this is one that the sutras actually were giving some gems on how to do initially. So in the old text, in the sutras, they have the Tartaka meditation. I probably just butchered that pronunciation. Forgive me. But it basically is imagining a fire in your mind's eye. So what you would initially try to do is like you probably stare at a candle. You like look at it, you'd understand the qualities of the flame, you'd understand how it flickers, you'd understand the depth of the flame and the constant changing nature of it. And then you take this representation that's a physical representation in real life and then model it in your head. And you just do that over a course of time. And then for them, like if you could model fire in your mind, now you're modeling one of the elements of the world. And they have different meditations of how to model those elements in the world. And you can go down in Buddhism, if you look at the Path of Purification, which is like a giant manual on Buddhism that came out of Sri Lanka, in that manual, if you want to study wind, you're like looking at the trees and you're looking at how the wind is going through trees or reeds. And then you're like modeling that in your mind's eye. You're being able to hold that in your mind's eye as a meditation object. So you see it in the world, you hold it in your mind's eye, and then if you're good at that meditation practice, able to take that meditative state into another location too and keep it going. So like for them, they're just building out their visual imaginations. And it was like a common practice to do that stuff back in the day. And now it's like the only time you can build out your visual imagination is if your curiosity led you upon that. If you're going down the route of artistry, then you can learn how to do these visuals. But there's a ton of easy, accessible, like that's super basic. Just look at something and start modeling it in your own mind. And then if you can figure out how to use it in real time too, like for Einstein, he's using thought experiments to then either write about it or to bring these experimentations into real life, just like Tesla too. He was just like, I would just see engineering designs in my mind's eye, and then I would just build them. So that too, like once you're practicing the basics of it, then you can understand the depth of it, especially with your other skill sets that are supporting it. And then you can start actually applying experimentation in real life to see if you can make faithful recreations with your own hands. And then that's your full cycle right there.
Wow, man. Dude, thank you. Any last takeaways? I think we need to like have a sauna conversation, the one we talked about. Yeah. And that's gonna be another conversation, because I know there's so many questions that I didn't even touch on, because I was very interested in just taking this to whichever way we kind of go with this. Any last takeaways for someone who is curious about this side of things, about figuring off about spirituality, about God? Like, where would you point them to?
Yeah. So the general answer to that is you have to look within. Silence is a great teacher. Nature is a great teacher. If all the greats are studying nature, a lot of these epiphanies that they have happened, whether it's Jesus or the Buddha, happened in nature. So if you can learn how to actually see nature and how to feel these things, then all this stuff is going to be like, you're going to get like the cipher that's able to give you the access that you need to understand all this information. And once you get that access, you just need one access point. Then the rest of the whole entire field becomes available to you. And so you just need to find your access point, especially with be honest with your nature and what you're interested in. And if you find that a version of that in meditation, you're going to unlock your intuitive mind. And we desperately need people that are in touch with their intuitive mind, because we're entering into a place where, if we look at historically, everyone that's been in touch with their intuitive mind is able to do amazing things. And I want to live in that future that we were promised, and then I want to build upon that future. Yeah. So yeah, we need more people that are able to do that.
You're already doing it, man. Thank you so much, Zaky J. Take care, guys.